The first question is, I know you get asked this a lot, but what kind of training is actually involved, a short version, to become an astronaut?
There is no short version.
Okay, then.
I'm very sorry.
That'll be sorry. Well,
When you walk in the door as a new astronaut, you get trained in land survival, water survival, flying the T-38 trainer jet. They teach you how to interact with media, a bunch of basic science. They teach you all of the systems on board the International Space Station. When I joined up, they teach you all the systems on board the Space Shuttle. You learn all the systems on board the Soyuz spacecraft, and there's a lot of them. You learn how to use the robot arm, which is very involved, and you learn how to put on a spacesuit and do spacewalks. You spend a lot of time in physical conditioning, learning how to get yourself in good shape for spaceflight.
Right.
And these days, everybody has to говорить по-русски.
Speak Russian.
Correct, and you need it at a fairly high level of proficiency in order to fly as a crew member on the Soyuz, which is our ride to the space station right now.
Wow.
Yeah, that takes a few years.
Understandably.
Yes.
I can see why it would. Next question. This might be a little bit of an odd one, but what impact do you think people having an interest in science fiction has led to interest in the space program?
Without science fiction, there would never have been a space program, and there never would be. Period. End of sentence.
Wow.
Everything that we now have that is engineered in our world came from somebody's imagination.
Right.
Thinking, wouldn't it be useful or wouldn't it be cool if?
We just had this.
And it all starts as a dream.
Right.
Then you can start putting the engineering in it, the science and the science fiction.
Right.
So the dream might have been Jules Verne, and he put a lot of science into his trip to the moon as well.
Right.
Shooting people there in a cannon. Johannes Kepler in the 1600s wrote a story about a trip to the moon.
Heard of it.
So the imagination comes first. Sometimes the science may trail hundreds of years behind, but eventually we make these dreams real. And that is why I am here at Comicpalooza. So we have a lot of imagination in this building today.
We do.
And a lot of imaginative people and dedicated people who are dedicated to things that are disconnected from current reality, that may seem geeky or nerdy or just out there.
Right.
But the people in this building today are going to be making the unbelievable space missions of tomorrow. And that's why I feel that this is an audience worth coming and talking to about, here's the reality of space. You've heard about the imagination, here's some reality, maybe we can merge the two and get something better.
Very cool. We might come back to some more of that here
Sure.
in a second. Where do you see manned spaceflight going from here?
Right now we're struggling, and we don't have the budgets we did in the 60s. Right now the United States doesn't even have the capability to launch its own astronauts to the space station, which we largely built and paid for. So that kind of makes me mad. But there are some new commercial entities coming into play: SpaceX, Blue Origin, people that companies that didn't exist a few years ago. We still have our old players, Boeing, Sierra Nevada, and there's these outfits that are trying to launch tourists on suborbital flights,
Right.
X-Corps, Virgin Galactic, and there will be more. So this is a new side of space exploration that gets business involved, which we have not really had, at least in the human side. Business has been involved in communication satellites, things
Right.
like that, for ages, and there's nothing wrong with that industry. They're doing
Right.
just fine. Comsats are still lucrative. So, but putting people in space, it's been the purview of governments since it started. But that's beginning to change. And if it takes off, some of these companies can start pulling a profit to make it worth doing business and make other companies hungry to cut into that business. I think it'll be unrecognizable in 20 years.
Wow. That's something really to bend your brain with.
But we're in a tough time right now, and you can convince yourself to be depressed pretty easily, but you can look at some of these new players in the realm and make yourself pretty excited pretty easily too.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you were younger, were there any sci-fi stories or characters inspired you to become an astronaut?
Not so much the characters. I grew up, I like to say I'm 31 years old this year in hexadecimal. You can work out the math. So I grew up with Robert I. Heinlein and Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov. So those were the stories that really fired my imagination when I was younger. Of course, I love the Star Wars movies.
Right.
I was a big Trekkie. I had all the books,
Right.
paraphernalia, and stuff like that. Lately, I've been fairly busy to keep. I haven't had enough time to do a lot of hobby stuff, but so that's what really caught my imagination as a kid.
So the gamut from Stranger in Strangeland to Captain Kirk, you've pretty much been back and forth on.
Yeah, or before even Stranger in a Strangeland. That particular book marked a change in Mr. Heinlein's writing style. Before that was Time for the Stars and Rocket Ship Galileo and Farmer in the Sky. Those
before
were
he
ones.
went fantasy and psionic stuff.
Yes, well, yes.
We'll leave it at that. And the last question that kind of ties in what you said earlier. For somebody who doesn't understand it, how are cons and the press conferences guys that you guys preside with or are part of different?
Well, an ordinary press conference, generally we just want to tell the story of what we've done.
Right.
And also, all astronauts end up having to do press conferences, whether you like it or not. Okay?
Right.
Especially that are associated with your mission.
Right.
Con, in our case, the organizers contacted Johnson Space Center and say, hey, we are doing a special new track in our con this year, and we want to talk about science. Would you like to send somebody to talk about space exploration to be part of our science track?
Right.
And NASA contacts the astronaut office and say, hey, there's a comic book convention. Who wants to go? Okay? So are people who don't like talking to the public or are only able to process things in a very technical way.
Right.
Say, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
But we have in the office some fairly serious science fiction fans who understand fans,
right,
and are not afraid to talk to them,
right,
and don't look down on them,
right,
knowing that that was me 20 years ago. And so in this case, the opportunity came up and said, yes, I would love to come to Comicpalooza and talk to folks, talk to the fans, talk to the kids, get them fired up about space. They already have the dedication to things that ordinary people don't think about,
right,
and to things that are imaginary.
Right.
But again, remember, flying to the moon used to be imaginary.
Exactly.
Actually, it is again. That's depressing. Flying in space at all used to be imaginary, but now we're doing it. So to me, that's valuable use of my time, and that's why I'm here.
Right. Well, everything from space medicine to communication devices used to be imaginary at one time, too.
Yep, GPS.
Right, and sci-fi and space exploration made those things possible.
That's correct. And science fiction both imagines things. Now, most of what appears in sci-fi will never be real, but some of it will.
Right.
And to me, there is value in feeding back some of that science back into the art-based community,
right,
and the fan-based community where you have the dedication to things that don't yet exist.
Right.
Because that's going to produce value for us. Better ideas, crazy wild ideas that will work, but we don't understand them now. In the future, it's going to make the world better.
I agree. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very
God
welcome.
bless you, and good luck with your